Oh, hi. Welcome to Aquatazoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about social media in zoos and aquariums. I have mentioned this before as a part of marketing and public relations and that sort of thing, but I did talk a little bit about this in last week's episode when we were talking about risk management, but I thought I would go into social media specifically because it's an ever-evolving challenge. For the record, I'm an animal care person. I am not a marketing or PR or social media person. I'm terrible with social media, if I'm to be honest, but I'm just going to give you the roundabout, vague idea of what's going on with social media with zoos and aquariums in general. Like, some of our facilities are much better at it than others, and it's all just, it's another tool that we use to reach our guests or reach potential people who might be interested in animals or biology, marine biology, that sort of thing. And so it is a tool that we use, and it is a very specific one that is constantly changing, and I feel like it's a big challenge. So props to the people out there who are handling social media for any organization. So first and foremost, we got to talk about the brand. Every brand is different. Some of them are a little bit better protected than others and a little bit more uniform than others. But ultimately, when you're dealing with any kind of organization and you have social media out there for said organization, it needs to kind of fit into the brand. And that means that the tone of voice is a certain way, the pictures and photos and videos and all those things are kind of like a certain type. And just like overall, you get a very similar kind of sensation or view of the organization with each social media post. If you have kept up with any like fast food chains or anything in the US and their social media, sometimes they have, beefs online, which are typically pretty funny, where they're like, making fun of each other and that sort of thing. There's a certain brand awareness that is happening as that's going on. And yes, it's some, most likely young, feisty social media person that is kind of, vetting the comments and making sure that things are, funny and, taking a jab at another organization, but not going too far, not stepping too far across the line. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be funny. It's not meant to be, an actual problem with another organization. We're not trying to cause fights here. With zoos and aquariums, we're trying to typically provide a community resource. So that's generally the type of vibes you could expect from the social media for an AZA accredited zoo or aquarium. So what I mean by that is we might post, and I say we as the organizations, it's not me because I'm not good at social media, but we're going to post something that, is maybe an animal that we have, and we're going to highlight that animal. We're going to try and give you a fact about it, or, give you some information about the species. Or we're going to post something about like a talk that's happening at our institution that we invite people to be a part of. We try to showcase, what we're doing as far as in situ work, which means that we're going out into the field where the counterparts of the animals in our collections might be, and trying to make a difference for them and do some conservation work out in the field. And we like to highlight that kind of stuff. We like to provide space and time and resources for our guests to use. So we might introduce a new exhibit, we might put out a new program, we might want, just show people what we're up to in all the different facets that we're working within a zoo or aquarium. And we do that with a certain type of like educational entertainment kind of vibe, where we're going to try and provide you a fun, enlightening, engaging experience, but we're also making sure that you're learning something from it. So those tend to be the sorts of messages that you will find on the social media of a zoo or aquarium. Something to do with conservation and education, and it really just kind of aligns with what is typically our mission statement. And so it's not a lot of jibes at other organizations or other zoos or aquariums necessarily, unless it's all done in fun and jest and we're all in communication about that kind of stuff when it happens. I was in an institution where we got into a, posting war, quote unquote, with other local zoos and aquariums. And it was basically a war of post the cutest animal. And it was so cute. It was very, very cute. And it was adorable. There were all kinds of baby everythings. And they were just, going at each other and posting these really, really cute animals. And, trying to make it educational as well. So that's the kind of quote unquote war you might see between zoo and aquarium institutions. And it's the best. It's really, everybody wins because we get to show off our animals and other institutions get to show off theirs. And we're just kind of generating a happy, fun, really cute way of interacting with each other and interacting with guests. And all of that happens during social media time. One of the challenges with social media is that things change really, really quickly, including the social media platforms themselves. And so being on top of what is the hot thing and what is the right social media to use for the right type of audience that you're trying to reach is really important. And so not only do we have to have this kind of uniform brand type messaging that we're trying to produce, we are also trying to produce it in different ways for different groups of people to reach different groups at the same time. And so that can be kind of challenging. I'm not trying to disparage anyone or make anyone feel old or anything. But if you're trying to reach, parents and grandparents and invite them to visit your institution, you might use Facebook for that. If you're trying to entice some younger visitors, you might use Instagram or TikTok, right? So there's like all these different types of social media, and they all have their pluses and minuses, and they reach certain audiences and aren't as successful at reaching others. I'm not saying that a 17-year-old cannot have Facebook and doesn't use it, like they might. And so you just have to understand how society, I guess, is using the social media options as to how we then interact with those social media options as an institution. And that's why it's important whoever's running the social media has kind of an idea of how this all works and how dynamic it is, because it could change on a dime. Twitter used to be the biggest social media thing other than Facebook probably for many, many years, and everybody posted everything on Facebook and Twitter. And that's how it was for years. But then a big shift happened when someone else bought Twitter and changed it. And so now it is much less used than it used to be, at least in the zoo and aquarium world. And so, you have other options. There are other social medias options that are kind of similar to what Twitter was. And so you can go, say, on Blue Sky or something like that. There's other options. And so you have to be able to navigate that. So, of course, there are some institutions that are still using Twitter, and that's fine. But if they have changed the kind of audiences that they're trying to reach, they may need to pivot and go to another social media site, which is hard to keep up with. I, tip my hat to these social media folks because they got to stay on top of it in order to keep engaged in the right way with the right type of content and the right type of messaging just to reach the people that they're aiming for. Because if you miss, you seem very lame. And it's not the end of the world, but you'll be more effective if you know which social media to use for what type of demographic you're trying to reach, and then how to form those messages in a way that makes sense. I have to hand it to some of our facilities on the West Coast, our Californian facilities. They're really good at using live feeds and live streams. So I'm talking Instagram, I'm talking TikTok, I'm talking YouTube. They're using all of these things as tools to get their message out and for people to give people access to the animals almost directly, right? So I've seen lots of feeds through Monterey Bay Aquarium, for example, and they are giving guests access to otters all the time or jellies all the time Georgia Aquarium also does it. They have access, people can log in and just watch their big ocean tank, which I could just sit in front of for the rest of my life. It's so fun to watch. And so people who aren't physically there can kind of go online and log in and see. And they can get access to this through social media or just through the website. And that's a good use. Reminding people that that's there as an option for them is a really good use of social media. And then there are other facilities. I will throw out Aquarium of the Pacific as really good live streamers, because then they have somebody there talking to people, interacting with the people on the live stream, and answering their questions as they walk through the aquarium and look at stuff. And so that's a really neat way of introducing not only your staff and your animals, but just getting the guests comfortable with talking with people who are experts or who can be experts. And so that's a really good way to get people in touch without them having to spend a ton of money to be there. Now, does that help in the long run? I think it does. Because it just gets more people interested in actually going to the place to see that for themselves, right? It's different when you're looking at it on a screen, and much more engaging when you're there physically. Sure, you could have watched hours of an exhibit online, but it's not the same as standing there looking at those animals and maybe even interacting with those animals at their own exhibit, right? Otters are pretty interactive and you can kind of run back and forth in the window with them, right? That's totally different than watching them on a screen. So I feel like it's a good outreach for an organization to reach people that they would not have reached before, without having them, needing to come to your facility and see what you have to offer. And then, as far as the streams go, it's really helpful to be able to talk directly to a staff person who has an idea of what's going on with these animals and their history and all the, like, what's that fish's name? That kind of stuff. You would be amazed at how often we get asked these kinds of questions. And so that encourages them to then kind of maybe go in and meet that person in person, meet them face to face and see those animals face to face. They may not have been interested in aquatic life or animals before, but then they see these videos and live streams and live feeds and they're like, wow, look at these behaviors. I'd love to see what else they're doing. Like, I can't see the entire exhibit from this angle. I should go in there and check it out. I should go in there and, give these institutions, my hard-earned dollars, because they've provided me with hours of entertainment, and just being able to interact and touch people wherever they happen to be in life and encourage them, inspire them to get involved, that sort of thing, and get them in our doors with social media's help is awesome. To be fair, it is not all sunshine and rainbows. I know last week's episode I mentioned a time where social media kind of roughed up our facility a little bit where I was working at the time, because our director had taken a photo of several diamondback terrapins that were doing what diamondback terrapins do, which is just climbing all on top of each other and being really cute. And she just snapped a quick photo that did not give any context to the type of living situation those turtles were in. And basically, people assumed that we were housing these animals too closely together and that they had no room to move and we were just leaving them that way, when really the context of the photo was that they were looking for a snack and they pile on top of each other and push each other out of the way because they want to be first to the food. They had plenty of room to swim and haul out and sun themselves and relax, but you couldn't see that in the photo, right? And so people just assumed that we were not giving them what they needed, and they just were not happy about seeing that photo on social media. We learned a valuable lesson that day. It happens. It's okay. So in the future, we had to really kind of closely look at any photos that we were going to post to make sure that they're showing the full story, basically. You can see how much room an animal has. You can see an animal doing its natural behavior. There's also additional attention paid to it, because once you make a post, you have to kind of monitor it and make sure that, questions are answered, that your information's accurate, and that people don't get the wrong idea about what you've posted and that sort of thing. And that falls on these social media folks that really have a lot of work to do as far as keeping up with the trends, keeping up with the memes, and the viral moments so that we can kind of get involved where we can, and just managing the perception of the institution through social media. At another point in a facility where I was working, the person who was in charge of the social media was just putting up cute pictures of animals with no information that went with them. And so that was a little bit difficult to deal with, because it wasn't wrong to post the animals, of course. But then lots of people would ask what that animal was, where it lives, what's the deal, is that in my backyard, that kind of thing. And then there was no information that was posted along with the photo, so they didn't know. And so when people would ask that kind of stuff, the keepers were trying to answer because we didn't want people to be without the information they were looking for. We were a scientific, educational, resource for our area. And so we wanted to continue that. We wanted to stick to the brand and be that resource for people. And so the social media folks that we had at the time were not keeping up with that. And so it caused a big uproar when the keepers started responding on social media to the questions. And, it's weird when you've got keepers who are just using their regular old social media pages to respond to questions that guests are asking, and there's no significance to them. Like there's no signifier that they work there. They're just saying that they do. It can just cause confusion and problems. And then it also made the institution look like it didn't know what it was doing, that was kind of what was being portrayed. So we had a big discussion, I guess, about how to use social media in that case and how things needed to change, because clearly something needed to change, because the keepers were not happy that the social media folks were posting pictures and not giving any explanation or any information to the guests, especially when they were asking specific questions. They were not answering them. And then the social media people did not want the keepers responding with their own regular Facebook, profiles or whatever, because then it looks like the institution is not willing to answer. And, anybody could say that they work there. It's just a regular old person with a regular old account, but the institution should be the one fielding those questions, or somebody who is clearly affiliated with the institution. And so we had a big discussion about how social media should be used, how we portray ourselves, what the brand looks like, and how we engage with our social media presence. My point is that this is not easy. This is not simple, and it's always changing. Every day there's something new. There's something new that you can't say. There's something new that you should say. Things that are funny, things that are out of style. Like, all of this stuff is happening all at the same time, plus different media platforms and this and that. And so hats off to those social media folks who are paying attention to all of this on behalf of the institution and on behalf of the brand. I hate to bring it up again, but at one point a couple years ago, there was an institution that had a stingray who they thought was pregnant and then proceeded to have a very high social media presence while having the world's longest stingray pregnancy, quote unquote. And so ACA institutions were trying to get through to these folks like, this is a dangerous game you're playing here. You're on social media all the time. I saw via social media an ultrasound of this ray and did not see anything significant except for things that needed to be seen by a vet. It was not a pup. There was nothing in there, but the person running the ultrasound did not know how to read the ultrasound, basically, is what I'm saying. And not that I'm a veterinarian, I am not, but I've done enough ultrasounds on stingrays specifically looking for pups that I kind of know what I'm looking at. And so they put everything out there on social media, and that's risky, but it could be a good risk. In this case, this was a bad risk because they just didn't, it was not an institution that was funded well enough and staffed well enough to handle the social media presence that it would put out there. So they were posting every day about this stingray and trying to give updates and saying, no, she hasn't had her pup yet. No, we don't know how many there are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, trying to answer questions, but not really having the knowledge base to back it up necessarily. And it turned into a big mess. So people all over the world got really invested in this stingray because the stingray had not been with a male in its entire time at this little aquarium, and this was, immaculate conception, it's a miracle, that kind of thing, which parthenogenesis is a thing that happens in the animal kingdom, and that's when an animal can reproduce without the genetic material of a second animal. So it's basically a clone of itself, essentially. And there's a fair amount of animals that can do that. The stingrays could have been doing that, but that was not the case. It actually needed a veterinarian's help because there were some other issues going on that were causing it to look like it was pregnant, like look swollen. And so there were other things going on. But regardless, they were posting about this thing constantly. This whole situation, the ultrasound, still not pupped yet, like all of the, the countdown to who knows when she's going to pup, right? And so this was a social media storm. And it turned into one that did not do well because they just didn't have the resources that they needed to do that well and to be informed and understand what was really going on. They just went to social media saying it's a miracle that this stingray has pups. It's, this and that, making lots of claims that were kind of unfounded and not founded in science necessarily. And I'm not trying to give any shade to this aquarium. It was just an unfortunate thing to watch. When you also work for an aquarium that's really honestly not far away. So it was a challenge at the time, and a lot of zoos and aquariums were kind of inadvertently involved with that. We were being asked about it. My facility was being called on the daily asking when the stingray was going to pup. Wrong aquarium, but we still had to field these questions because this animal was so popular in social media for, 15 minutes of fame. And so it's really tough when you blow up like that. And this poor facility, tiny though it is, found this out the hard way. When you've got an absolute crazy outbreak of a story and it's all centered on your social media, it's really hard to contain. And it's hard to walk things back. It's hard to be transparent at that point. It's hard to admit you might have made a mistake, right? So this animal blew up, was in international news, which was lovely, gained exposure for lots of aquariums, I would imagine. But then it turns out that this animal just needed a veterinarian's care and was not, in fact, pregnant like the facility thought she was. And eventually she did pass away. But what had happened on social media still plagues that facility to this day. And that was a while ago, right? And so they haven't quite recovered from that. They still get posts and questions about this stingray and accusations about not giving the stingray good care and all this other stuff. And I'm not going to say anything about that because I don't know. I don't know the details of what was going on, but I know from my end in another aquarium facility that is not too terribly far away that it was a challenge at the time because people were obsessed with this stingray. They wanted to know everything about it, what we knew about it, and all this other kind of stuff. And, I was watching and I was thinking, ooh, this does not look like a good situation to me. But, maybe I'm wrong. And it turns out that I wasn't necessarily wrong about that situation. But it's hard to walk it back on social media. It's hard to corral all of the things that are being said, and it's hard to disappoint so many thousands of people who are watching from all around the world when you say that, no, the animal didn't pup, instead it passed away. Like, that's a really hard thing to own up to. And no, they didn't post that expecting it to blow up the way that it did. I totally get that. But, you've got to be careful with your social media. I guess that's the moral of the story here is that, yes, we're trying to be transparent about what's going on, at least in zoos and aquariums, with social media, because we want people to know what's going on with the animals, what challenges they're facing, what we're doing to mitigate that, how awesome our staff is at taking care of animals or, doing conservation work, doing all the things that we do in a zoo or aquarium. And we want to make sure that we are being as factual as possible because we are a scientific resource to our communities. In this case, that aquarium was trying to be a resource for their local community, but they just didn't, they stumbled, I guess. They stumbled on that one and didn't know how to handle it once it got out of control. And so no shade. I understand. It was a very difficult position that they were in. But, the rest of us learned a lot from watching what was going on with their social media. I guess you could say that we all understand that our social media accounts are kind of a double-edged sword. So it gets people in and acquainted with our staff and our animals and all the work that we do, which is wonderful because not everybody's going to see every aspect of all the work that we're doing behind the scenes. And that's great for them to be able to have access to it, but with, the click of a mouse or whatever, And so that is a good thing. But then when things get out of hand or things go wrong, people are on the internet are mean. I'm sure you know that already, but when social media posts get out there and things are not going well and, say in our case, an animal passes away or something like that, people start making up stories and accusing you of things. And so social media managers really have to be on top of kind of shaping their messaging so that it is clear, concise, and truthful, and that it doesn't leave a lot of room for speculation and stuff like that. So it's a tough job, and it requires a lot of finesse to make sure that you can kind of optimize the good things about social media. So staying in the public eye, making sure that people know that you're there as a resource for science and education and that sort of thing. But at the same time, kind of not avoiding the negatives, but handling that delicately, I suppose, is the best term I could put to it. So when we do have animals die, just understanding that we are grieving. We, the animal care team, we, the staff of the zoo or aquarium, we are grieving, and social media posts will reflect that, but we want to be factual about what happened, and if there was something that was preventable, whatever, that kind of thing. Usually it's an animal dealing with old age a lot of the time because, we've been at this for a minute. We're pretty good at taking care of animals, but, things happen in the day-to-day operations of a zoo or aquarium, and we want people to be simultaneously knowledgeable about what's going on if they ever need us for anything, and also to let people know that it's not always rainbow and sunshine. There are hard aspects too, and there's good and bad, just like social media can go well and it can go poorly. And so just people behind their keyboards are able to say and do a lot of things, and we just have to be careful with that. We want to reach people. We want to know that people have this beautiful resource at their fingertips if they want it, but we also don't want them to come down on us, make accusations, make up stories, and that kind of thing. We want to make sure that we're truthful, we're being transparent as is sensible to be, and we want to encourage people to do research and use us as a resource as needed, but they can look elsewhere as well. And we try to partner up with other organizations and institutions where we can to make it fun and engaging and just keep that new content coming, because that's another thing with social media. We just got to keep coming up with content, as any, content creator kind of knows. If you're out there and you're, on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook all the time, how hard it is to come up with new content all the time. Same thing goes for zoos and aquariums. Yes, we have all these cool animals doing all kinds of cool things. The content kind of makes itself sometimes, but there are other times where it's just a job. It is work. Coming up with the right ideas at the right time, the timing's got to be perfect, all of that stuff. Shout out to those social media folks out there working for all their organizations. That is a hard job. I do not envy you. I would not be good at it. But that's generally how social media goes for zoos and aquariums. It's a fine line, and it's a double-edged sword. It's a challenge, but it can be really, really helpful. So if you have any questions about that or any other zoo or aquarium things or leadership and management stuff, you can find me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget you can follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you're planning a vacation and you don't know where to start, let me know. I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.